Okay, we're right at 1 o'clock, so we can go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the September 21st, 2021 meeting of the Metropolitan Area Water Supply Advisory Committee, also known as MAWSAC. We will have Tessa, our recording secretary, conduct a roll call to ensure that we have a quorum.
Chair Wendy Wolf, I see that you are here.
Here.
Annika Bankston. Annika Bankston. Jeff Berg.
Jeff Berg here.
Thank you, Jeff. Sandeep Berman.
Here.
Thank you, Sandeep. Mark Delighted Matt. Or rather, in place of Valerie Grover, do we have Vanessa Demuth? Vanessa Demuth? Mike Huang. Mike Huang. Phil Klein. I know you had logged on earlier. Phil, can you give me a verbal confirmation? Phil Klein.
I also see Vanessa on here. People
Wonderful.
may have logged in and then stepped away for a second. I'm not sure.
I will come back to both Vanessa and Phil at the end of roll call.
Okay.
Phil Klein is here.
Thank you, Phil.
Apologize.
Brad Larson. Is Brad Larson present? Susan Morris. Do we have Susan Morris present? Catherine Nuschler.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Michael Robinson. Michael Robinson. Patrick Shea. Is Patrick Shea present? Jamie Sherban.
Present.
Thank you, Jamie. Lisa Volbrecht. I believe she noted that she would not be present today. Kevin Watson. Is Kevin Watson present? Tanya West Hafner did note that she would not be available today. And given that we do not have a quorum unless Mike Huang is also present. I do see
Yep,
you.
Mike Wong just turned on his
Wonderful.
camera. And Vanessa is listed as a participant here, but she didn't answer before. Vanessa, are you here? We don't hear you. But she did put in the chat that she's here.
We would still need 2 additional members to be present. If Brad Larson is present, if you could speak, that would be very helpful. Or post something in the chat regarding your presence. Is Brad Larson present?
Pat Shea just arrived, so there's another member.
Well, there we are.
Mike Wong's here, by the way.
Thank you. We would still need Brad Larson to join in order to make a quorum.
We have one
Joe
person.
Richter's here, if that helps.
We have one person by phone, a 612 something that ends with 16. Who is that?
This is Annika Bankston, Minneapolis.
Wonderful.
I'm here still working to get it on the laptop, but I have audio right now. Yep.
Thank you, Annika. You make quorum.
Great. Okay. So The Metropolitan Council Chair has determined it's not practical or prudent to conduct an in-person meeting in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Accordingly, committee members will participate in this meeting via telephone or other electronic means, and the meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statutes 13D.021. We encourage you to monitor the meeting remotely. If you have comments, we encourage members of the public to email us at public.info@metc.state.mn.us, and we will respond to your comments in a timely manner. Next up is the review and approval of the agenda. We do that by consensus. If anybody has any changes they would like to make to the agenda, please speak up now. Seeing and hearing none, we will consider the minutes approved. Thank you. So today what we're going to be doing is exchanging information on the challenges of the groundwater, surface water interaction in the Twin Cities metro area. Like our last meeting, this information will be used to develop recommendations and supporting information for the report to the Metropolitan Council and the legislature in 2022. Emily will lead a presentation with some background information and some speakers, and then after that we'll do a group exercise. So take it away, Emily.
Thank you very much. And Greg, can you please pull up the recommendations presentation? Great, thank you. So welcome everyone to our third MAWSAC meeting on the topic of groundwater and surface water interaction. Next slide. So again, before we start, I'd like to call out the resources shared by committee members related to our topic today. These resources fall into the topics listed on the slide and can be found in the draft recommendations document sent prior to today's meeting. Next slide, please. Today, you are being asked to share your recommendations as a committee around the groundwater and surface water interaction. Your perspectives will be used to draft content in the 2020 report to the Metropolitan Council and Minnesota Legislature. Your perspectives will guide the Council's water supply planning activities and will shape the preparation of the Council's regional development framework. So today, we will take the same approach as last time. We'll introduce the first draft of recommendations from TAC describing the problem and challenge, a high-level goal, and some recommendation for actions to achieve that goal. And again, this current draft is based on past committee and water supply stakeholder conversations, as well as individual interviews held with MAWSAC and TAC members. Next, you'll hear some regional and local information to help set some context. Then we will have a group discussion and exercise in Mural to review and revise the draft problem statements and recommended actions. This exercise will be a chance for you to share your thoughts and perspectives on the already recommended actions, as well as propose additional. And then finally, we wrap up with next steps. Next slide, please. So today we are discussing how we can improve our understanding of how groundwater and surface water interact. Some examples of what might be discussed include the need and importance of understanding the metro area water budget during both wet and dry periods, water reuse approaches and grant opportunities, the importance of building a knowledge base of how groundwater and surface water are interconnected and impact both water quality and water supply, and how to manage ground and surface water as one resource. So again, on this slide, this is just an introduction to the draft language that we'll be discussing in more detail shortly. This language is found in the draft recommendations document that was sent prior to the meeting. Next slide, please. So as myself and our speakers provide some regional and local background information, I want to highlight these points that were brought up at the TAC meeting regarding groundwater and surface water interaction. I will give you a moment to read these considerations. And next slide, please. So groundwater and surface water deal in the water balance, which is not fully understood in the metro area. One example of the work the Council has undertaken to better understand the water balance is a project to test the feasibility of bringing climate projections into our regional groundwater model. We started with the Council's existing regional groundwater model that has been used to support the Water Resources Policy Plan and the Master Water Supply Plan. This model has a tool for infiltration that allows us to better understand how a range of projected precipitation and temperature changes can affect infiltration and the amount of water available to recharge groundwater. So using weather data from 1988 to 2009, the model calculated mean infiltration was 8.2 inches per year, which is represented on the far left dark blue bar. Then using weather data from 2010 to 2019, the model calculated mean was between 10 and 12 inches per year, which is the second from the left dark blue bar. So then we used projected climate data, and the model calculated mean infiltration was between 4 and 6 inches per year from the time periods 2020 to 2039, 2040 to 2069, and 2070 to 2099. So the global climate model data suggests that it's very possible that infiltration can go down in the future. And there are multiple factors that could shape this. For example, even if our total annual precipitation stays the same or even increases, if more falls in the summer versus winter, it's more is likely to be evaporated instead of flowing down into the groundwater system. Another explanation could be if summer precipitation comes as a high intensity rain or winter snowpack melts very quickly, so early in the spring, water is more likely to run off than move down into the groundwater system. Or if changing temperatures lead to a longer growing season, more water will be used by the plants instead of moving deeper into the groundwater system. So that's just an intro to some of the work done at the Council to better understand how groundwater and surface waters interact. So next we will hear from two Council staff, Emily Resseger and John Clark, who will share their work related to this topic. Emily will present first, and she will share her work on the Council's priority waters list, and then John will follow, presenting his work looking at the interactions of groundwater and surface water. So if you are interested to learn more about the details of the projects, please contact me or either a speaker to learn more. At our Q&A after John and Emily present, I'd like to focus questions on the meeting topic. So with that, Emily, we are ready for you to present, and Greg, you can go to the next slide.
Great. I'm Emily Resseger. I'm part of the Water Resources section of the Met Council. We focus on surface water planning and management, and I'm going to tell you about a council resource. We are currently in the process of updating the priority waters list. We've taken a groundwater surface water approach to part of this effort using available data, and I think you may find this data application interesting. Next slide. What is the priority waters list? It is those waters the council has determined provide significant use and benefits to the region. The council will prioritize dedicating resources to these waters to help maintain and improve their use for present and future generations. We've had some version of the priority waters list since our 1982 water policy plan. Currently, there's a priority lakes list in the 2015 water resource policy plan, which is used to target monitoring resources primarily. The list is currently being updated with a modified methodology for our next water resource policy plan, and it will also include rivers and streams. The priority waters list is an internal Met Council effort, and it's going to be used mostly to target council resources. Next slide. Why do we have to prioritize? Well, in this region, we have over 950 lakes and hundreds of miles of rivers and streams. We need priorities for planning, investment, and operations purposes, such as how to spend staff time and money on monitoring, assessment, technical assistance, grants, education, and investments in our systems, such as our wastewater system and our transit system. Next slide. To decide on our priority waters, we've taken a very data-driven approach. We started by deciding on categories for use and benefit from which to evaluate waters. We have 9 categories. Drinking water is the surface waters used as principal or reserve water supply, or waters closely connected to surface or groundwater supplies. I'll dive more into this category in a minute. Science and education is waters used for education, such as nature centers or summer camps, or waters used in long-running academic or government science studies. Healthy habitat is waters that provide good habitat for native vegetation and wildlife to thrive. Recreation and tourism is those waters used specifically for activities adjacent to or on the water, such as swimming, boating, fishing, visiting regional parks, and biking on trails. Tranquil connection means waters that provide a mindful connection with the environment, usually waters that are quieter and more remote. Equity is waters that support use by underserved populations. Industrial and utility means water used for things like power generation or diluting treated waste. Cultural and historical value includes historical sites or sites sacred to specific cultural communities. And finally, provisioning is waters used to harvest vegetation or animals for consumption, such as fish or wild rice. Next slide. Since this is a water supply group, I wanted to look at that part of our project a little bit more. Water supply is considered in 3 ways. Surface waters used as drinking water supplies, including principal and reserve waters, are automatically included on the list. This includes waters such as the Mississippi River and Vadnais Lake. In addition, waters closely connected to surface or groundwater supplies that could contaminate are included in that drinking water category, and then industrial, commercial water users are included in that industrial and utility category. Looking at connection to water supply is a big change for us. In previous versions of the list, we only looked at waters directly used for drinking. But now at the Metropolitan Council, we're trying to look more at how groundwater and surface water are connected. There are waters we know are closely connected to groundwater, such as streams that are losing and gaining reaches. We know that it makes more sense to pay attention and potentially protect these waters, because if they become contaminated, they might quickly contaminate our groundwater supplies. So for prioritizing surface waters for drinking water protection, we subdivided it into 2 main categories: how vulnerable water supplies adjacent to surface waters are, and then how many people are using those specific water sources. So we looked at where there's the highest potential to impact drinking water, and we've been using data sets that are available in the region for groundwater DWISMA vulnerability, pollution sensitivity, the surface water DWISMAs, and emergency response areas. And we've been scoring waters according to how vulnerable they are using those data sets, and then how many people use those drinking water supplies. So the municipal DWISMA population served, and then domestic and non-municipal well density. Next slide. So some quick takeaways. The priority waters list is a tool council staff can use to ensure the highest valued waters in the region are prioritized and protected in our work. We're aiming for a completion date in early 2022, and we'll be launching an outreach effort very soon in mid-October to get feedback on our draft list. We will plan to include MAWSAC and TAC members in those outreach efforts, so keep an eye out for that coming soon. There will be 2 lists, one for lakes and one for rivers and streams. There will be overall priorities, but we will also have lists of waters that qualify under specific categories, including drinking water protection. This list will be part of the Council's 2050 Water Resource Policy Plan, and while the purpose is mostly for internal use, we will readily share the list and our methodology so that partners can adopt the list or our methodology as well if they are interested. But the biggest takeaways related to today's theme are that the Council is committed to considering drinking water, surface and ground, both in how we prioritize resources towards surface waters, and that data sets are now at high enough quality and at fine enough scale to make regional decisions related to groundwater and surface water. That's all I got. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Emily. And Greg, if you go to the next slide, we have John's presentation queued up.
Hi, Madam Chair of MAWSAC. Thanks for having me. I'm going to talk about some of the work that we've done in water supply planning at the Met Council with regard to groundwater and surface water interactions. Next slide, please. So, what are the concerns? Well, why do we care about groundwater and surface water interactions? Groundwater and surface water are interacting all of the time, all over the place. Emily mentioned some of the ways that groundwater and surface water interact. For instance, gaining and losing reaches of streams. But a lot of the discussion and approaches to the subject matter have been framed by some pretty large events some dramatic events around the metro that are related to interacting groundwater and surface waters. So we know that groundwater pumping can impact surface water. We know that recharge, which is really a primary interaction of the surface and groundwater, is obviously impacted by land use change. There can be impacts to water chemistry and ecological function, or even infrastructure from rising water tables. And some of the associated impacts are lawsuits, business and tax losses, social and political costs, loss of recreation and cultural activities, loss of trust. Essentially, these sort of significant events, they impact people's lives, and that can be very costly in various ways. Next slide. So I'm going to talk briefly about one of the projects that I've worked on, and this is a multi-phase project where really the mission is to try and understand where these connections are most likely to occur in the metro, and where impacts associated with those connections are more likely to happen. Really, we want to sort of understand like where risk and susceptibility, where those are the greatest in the metro, and then maybe we can start thinking about how to make different decisions related to that understanding. So we also really want this to be something that is usable at not just a regional level, but at local level. So we want to be able to develop guidance for using this information. And really, of course, ultimately, we want to improve the resiliency of our water resources and our water systems, which are very much connected. Next slide, please. So we took this, we use this two-pronged data and information approach. We use a really simplified hydrogeologic assessment where we're really trying to understand how rapidly water moves from the water table to the first bedrock surface. So basically, where those travel times are short, and in this case, short means less than 50 or 60 years, you know, connections to the bedrock aquifers are more likely. Of course, any of the material above the bedrock, any of that superficial geology, which is also used as a drinking water source in many areas, you know, is more likely to be connected. So we then, with that hydrogeologic approach, we try to confirm our travel time estimates with geochemical data. So basically, we looked at well water testing results from around the metro, and where there were tritium hits, chloride hits, nitrate hits, and above detection limits. We compared those travel times, and where they agreed and where they disagreed can be viewed on this kind of weird map on the right. So on that map, the areas in green or turquoise, however that looks to your eye, that's where connections are most likely, and that's where those two different data types agreed. And the areas that are kind of the brown mustardy color, that's where there was also agreement, but travel times were slower, longer. So there's a number of limitations with the approach. There was lots of interpolation. Obviously, we don't have well water data everywhere. So, you know, in some places in the metro, that data is plentiful, and in other areas it's not. Also, not all of the geologic atlases were updated at the time of this study. So, for instance, Dakota County is a recent update that I'm sure would change the way this map looks a little bit. And again, also this particular phase of the study didn't explicitly evaluate the water table and superficial aquifer relationships. Next slide, please. So this is an ongoing project, but I kind of wanted to talk about in general what are some of the things that are needed. What is some of the information, some of the approach that's needed that would be helpful in addressing groundwater and surface water interaction challenges. So the first thing is what I would call a shared and holistic conceptual model of our water system. So basically a recognition that different water types, although maybe managed and regulated separately, are connected, and our water systems are also connected. So what happens in one area can impact directly or indirectly what happens in another area. And this is some of the data and information that I think needs to be included in that conceptual model. We also need a robust monitoring network that is built around understanding groundwater and surface water interactions. We have pretty good monitoring data in the metro, but a lot of that monitoring network is different sections of it are built independently of the others, and it's built for different purposes. So again, sort of identifying where priority areas associated with groundwater surface water interactions are in the metro, and then establishing monitoring networks around that would be helpful. High resolution modeling. So in those areas, it may be important to really have a modeling done, groundwater and surface water modeling at a much finer scale than we currently do it for the region. And again, basically information that allows communities, decision makers, water resource managers, policymakers, you all, to consider groundwater, surface water interactions in their decisions. That's all I have. Any questions? I'd be happy to take afterwards or an email. Thanks.
Thank you, John and Emily. We have just a couple minutes if anyone has questions for either John or Emily before we move on. And again, if you do have more detailed questions about the project, you can feel free to email me or contact Emily and John. Great, thank you, Emily. I see that Emily put her email in the chat. So unless anyone speaks up in the next few seconds, maybe we will move on to our local perspectives, and then if another question simmers when we have the Q&A with our local perspective speakers, you can just shout out your question to Emily or John. So Greg, why don't you go to the next slide, please? All right. So with the background in mind shared by Emily and John, we'll move on to our local perspective. We have 3 speakers today, so I'd like to thank Leslie Yetka, the Natural Resources Manager from the City of Minnetonka, Tiffany Schaffler, Project and Land Manager from Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, and Committee Member Klein from the City of Hugo. They will be speaking to their experiences with rising groundwater levels in their communities, impacts from a changing climate, collaboration to address and solve these challenging issues, and how that has impacted and changed their work. So again, we will save questions until all 3 speakers have shared. So we'll start with Leslie, and then Tiffany will go next and finish with Committee Member Klein. So Leslie, whenever you are ready, we are excited to listen.
All right, thank you, committee members. As Emily mentioned, I am Leslie Yetka. I'm the Natural Resources Manager with the City of Minnetonka. And as I'm sure you know, we're a suburb in the West Metro area. about 50 square miles. We have about 53,000 residents. We are primarily built out and primarily residential landscape. So some commercial, obviously roads, but primarily residential. And so I was asked to talk a little bit about, from our perspective, impacts from rising water tables or high water tables and climate. And one thing about Minnetonka is that we have a lot of trees and we have a lot of wetlands. And so we have a fairly rolling landscape, a lot of about 800 plus wetland areas. We have 9 lakes, fairly small lakes, part of Lake Minnetonka, but fairly small lakes, only one with a public access. So we have a lot of water. And I think one thing that is really indicative of rising water tables is high waters and how it impacts people, especially in residential property. 2 years ago, I actually started with the city 2 years ago, and we were dealing with consistently high rainfall events over the past few years before that. And so flooding was sort of the topic of the day for many people in our city. A lot of questions and concerns about high water and impacts from that, especially from a natural resource perspective. Impacts from that include dead and dying trees. I said we have a lot of trees, so we had a lot of changes in shoreline, the wetland edges, high water levels of lakes, which resulted in dying trees, and erosion, changes in vegetation, and all of those things are very noticeable for people, especially in residential property when high water is taking part of people's yards or encroaching into their gardens or where they have their swing sets, which seems to be a very common occurrence, or was a common occurrence here. But then fast forward to this year, we have very low water. Obviously, we're in a drought. We have ponds that are drying up. We have wetlands that are drying up. We have low lake water levels. And so the wide fluctuation, and one thing I've been struck with was the wide fluctuation is obviously very perceptible to people, and people react to it in very different ways. So we were hearing 2 years ago about how the city wasn't maintaining our infrastructure properly. Things must have been broken. We must be releasing water where we shouldn't be, or where we didn't normally because of the high water. And this year we are getting questions about, can we take our hose and use it to fill up our ponds because we want to see the water? We bought our house here because we want the nice pond that we live on, and now it has no water. So how can we fill up our ponds? So that's sort of a, show some of the human perceptions in dealing with these wide fluctuations that we're experiencing. One particular project I wanted to talk about to kind of get at these questions here is we have one lake, it's Shady Oak Lake, which is in the southwest corner of our city. And it drains to, it doesn't drain to, it's actually a landlocked lake. But it is adjacent to 9 Mile Creek, and the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District manages, or at least oversees the waters in that area. And so this is an example of a lake that historically has always been fairly consistent in its water levels, groundwater fed, but the past few years up until now, it has had consistently high water levels. And so for the first time, the city was faced with the question of how do we address high water levels that are consistently high in a landlocked lake with residential properties around much of it. And it's adjacent to a large wetland area that feeds into 9 Mile Creek, yet they aren't physically connected through surface flow. And so a response to this has been that the city is undertaking an effort to actually install an automated control structure, which is something that the city has never done before. We have this lake, we have other lakes and other ponds and wetlands that are landlocked. But for the first time, we're having to expend capital funds to find a way to address the consistent high water and do it in a way that's not going to impact downstream, because Again, this feeds into a creek that then feeds into, drains into Eden Prairie and Bloomington and Edina. And so the watershed district, we're having to partner with them, or we are partnering with them to ensure that anything we do on the lake to manage lake levels there is not negatively impacting the creek and then communities downstream. So this is a first time that the city is looking at an automated control structure so that we can carefully manage the water level of the lake, that we're not discharging when it's too low, or we're not discharging when it's low. We're only discharging when it's high, or when it exceeds 100-year water level, but only when the creek is also at a reasonable level where we're not flooding downstream. So, this is about a $980,000 capital project that the city is undertaking. And we couldn't do this without working with our neighboring cities as well as the watershed district. These are DNR protected waters, so we have to work with the DNR because not only do we want to protect infrastructure in the surrounding the lake and in the watershed and in the stream downstream, but we also want to protect the habitat as well. As I mentioned, there's a fairly large wetland complex that this lake will eventually drain into, and then ultimately 9 Mile Creek. So it's important for the city and for our residents to maintain water levels, protect the infrastructure, but also maintain the quality of the habitat and the trees and the vegetation and wildlife that they see as being very important to their, quality of their life living here in the city. So I guess that's all I have. That's just an example of something that we're dealing with, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. Before we get to individual questions, we will move on to our next speaker. So Tiffany, please take it away.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm Tiffany Schaffler. I'm a project and land manager with the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. And as I work with Leslie Yeka as Minnetonka's in our watershed district. Our watershed district is located mostly in the West Metro and includes 29 communities that range from very urban, such as the city of Minneapolis, to still very rural and rapidly developing, such as the city of Victoria. And I'm here today to share findings of a multi-year investigation, which the watershed worked with other colleagues and partners to identify what factors were contributing to neighborhood water concerns near Lake Nokomis during 2014 to 2019. And perhaps some of you are familiar with these water concerns, and we'll learn more as I talk through today. So the issue and challenge that was presented down near Lake Nokomis was that starting in 2014, some property owners southwest of the lake began to report water concerns to the city of Minneapolis. And these concerns reported concerns on like wet basements, wet backyards, impact to private sewer laterals, extended periods of saturated soils in areas that normally were dry, and the occasional what people would call a sinkhole, which aren't true sinkholes, but just kind of settling of some of the soil. And the impacts that appeared to be the most concerning for residents because of the high water were the impacts to those private sewer laterals, because high water was then resulting in increased cost to dewater those systems in order for contractors to come in and replace it. So in some instances, that was increasing costs 2 to 3 times to replace a private sanitary line. And since 2014, there's been dozens of hypotheses put forth by residents, by policymakers, and by other agency staff on what could be contributing to the water issue. And there's a lot of speculation that maybe it was groundwater levels, or maybe it was the surface water levels in Lake Nokomis or Minnehaha Creek. So Minneapolis took the point on tracking the reported concerns, obviously because it fell in their city. And then they also took the lead on assembling a multi-agency team because, as we all know, surface water and groundwater management falls under several jurisdictions across the Twin Cities. So this multi-agency team involves staff from the U.S. Geological Survey, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, Hennepin County, the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, and the City of Minneapolis. And this working group has worked over the past few years to evaluate and understand what could be contributing to the water concerns, and then, if possible, identify actions to mitigate the impacts for homeowners and community leaders. So first things first, what we did was this multi-agency group took those dozens of hypotheses and looked at what could be some actual viable factors that may be contributing to the concerns, and then also just with those understanding if any data gaps existed. And the main obvious gap that existed was groundwater data, particularly for the water table. There just wasn't any remotely close to Lake Nokomis. So the Hennepin County, the Department of Natural Resources, and the Park Board worked together to get 6 additional groundwater wells installed. So once we had groundwater data and we were able to look at past surface water level data from Minnehaha Creek and Lake Nokomis, and then we also looked at just the history of the landscape and superficial geology of the area. So what this multi-agency team has found is that over 100 years ago, prior to the area being developed, the landscape around Lake Nokomis had naturally occurring shallow wetlands and peat bogs. And obviously that made the area undevelopable at that time. And in order to make the area developable, a massive excavation project removed over 2.5 million cubic yards of soil from Lake Nokomis and placed it as fill over these adjacent low-lying and wetland areas. Then this landscape alteration then set the stage for residential development to occur, which took place over 40 years between the 1920s and 1950s, which also happened to coincide with the driest period on record for the Twin Cities and included the Dust Bowl drought. So after this landscape alteration happened, then we had these 40 years of record dry conditions that likely started to inform perceptions around that water was relatively easy to manage, even though these were former wetland areas. So now, with that knowledge in hand, we fast forward to the last decade, which we now know that the 2010 through 2019 decade was the wettest decade on record. And not only was it the wettest decade, but it also had the wettest 7 years on record between 2013 and 2019, which ended up producing a record precipitation surplus of over 39 inches. So another way to put that is essentially in that 7 years, you had over 8 years of rainfall squeezed into 7 years. And it's in that time frame that the water concerns around Lake Nokomis actually occurred. So now what we know is with more precipitation, the amount of water soaking into the ground is that naturally increasing, which raises the water table. And Metropolitan Council was able to help us provide some insight into that with the Metro Model 3 and estimated the groundwater recharge rates had increased 3 to 4 inches per year between 2012 and 2016, which if you total together can cause water tables to rise up to 2 feet. So all in all, the findings for this Lake Nokomis area is essentially the native peat and wetland soils that were filled a century ago for development still remain below the landscape today and are just have fill on top of it. And what's happening is the record rainfall is soaking in through that fill, and it's hitting this natural impermeable peat layer that essentially creates a natural perched water table, or like an empty bathtub that's trapped below the surface. So when the rainfall then infiltrates down, that bathtub fills up, and then the artificial fill at the surface is starting to also fill up, and essentially in turn is holding water and creating issues for basements and infrastructures that sit within that perched area of former peat. So the water concerns for most of the properties near this Lake Nokomis area are a result of high water tables that are perched and that are separate from the broader local groundwater table and surface waters. And the data showed that Minnehaha Creek and Lake Nokomis are not contributing to most of the water concerns in this area. So question on how Met Council could have helped in this is, and you've heard it from your staff, is just more groundwater data is needed. Currently, the watershed district's working with the DNR, USGS, and Hennepin County to cite locations for future water table wells. And we also just need more research and study on the interactions between groundwater and surface water. We need to model and predict areas across the Twin Cities where water tables may rise in the future and start to cause groundwater flooding and conflicts with the built infrastructure and underground utilities. And another area of support is just for our residents across the Twin Cities metro. There's many homes, or many areas across the Twin Cities. Lake Nokomis is not unique, where wetlands and former lake basins were filled to build homes during this record dry period. So how do we help those property owners across all these cities be resilient and adapt their homes, whether that's through grants or cost share? And another gap is just an insurance gap. It's very clear where the FEMA surface water floodplain is, and people have to get insurance for that, and that flooding is covered. But there is an insurance gap for groundwater flooding. And as the Met Council works to try to, see surface water and groundwater as one water, it's the same water that's flooding, whether it's coming from the ground or from the surface. So I'll just end with some lessons learned from this evaluation. It's definitely brought to light that climate change, that we need to be prepared for too little or too water, just as Leslie noted, in these drastic swings. And we also just need new data, new technology, and new partnerships. So, if you would have asked any of us, any water manager, if tracking the water table, prior to 2014 was important, it really wasn't. It doesn't, some of these things don't matter until they matter. So because of 2014 through 2019 and the record rainfall that happened, we've now lived through that wettest 7 years and are able to identify data gaps that exist. And another lesson learned was, obviously this evaluation had a lot of agencies involved, and each agency has a specialized role to play to help our communities. And what the Watershed District has identified is what we're going to work to do is to develop new tools and technology to more granularly track the water budget of our watershed. So we've currently, the past 2 years, have made investments to install about a dozen real-time sensors on all of our streams and lakes, not all of our streams, but on key streams and lakes across our watershed district. And then we just made a proposal that's being considered by the LCCMR right now to develop a two-dimensional model that's capable of integrating both surface water and groundwater, as most models in our field either do one or the other really well. So this coming December, we will be starting the development of a pilot 2D model in partnership with the City of Edina that will test the model options that have a groundwater and surface water component. That is our lessons learned over the past record wet 7 years, and I thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. That was really informative and interesting, and I'm looking forward to questions. So I acknowledge we are running a little behind schedule, so we are modifying our mural activities to end on time, so don't worry. So our last speaker will be Phil Klein with Committee Member Klein with City of Hugo. And then after Phil shares, we will have some time for Q&A for all three of our speakers. So Phil, when you are ready, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm Phil Klein with the City of Hugo. I sit in the City Council. We're just about 25 miles north of St. Paul, just off 35E. One of the things that we've been wanting to do is actually aggressively after stormwater reuse. And we've built a number of storm ponds, and that's what I really want to address is the structures that we've been building and the results that we've been seeing. This low rain event that we've been experiencing actually has been a plus, as bad as that may sound. It's really given us a real opportunity to see how well our stormwater ponds are actually really doing. One thing too is I just want to mention real quickly a big thank you to the Met Council, the DNR, and also the Rice Creek Watershed District for their support in all this, through their grants and technology that they've been able to help us with. one of the things that I first want to talk about is the savings that we've been able to see so far. We've saved estimated between 30 and 40 million gallons so far this year. And we're anticipating once we get all the other stormwater ponds online, we'll be doubling that here within the next year or so. The first thing I want to address is the construction of the stormwater ponds themselves. One of the things that we've with these low water events, the inlets have been somewhat of a problem. The water coming into the ponds, they come out of the tube and they flow over top of a fabric which is covered by riprap, and then flows into the pond. And we didn't extend that deep enough into the pond. And what has happened is when the pond gets low, it gets lowered by the removal of the water for sprinkling the lawns and so forth. It creates a cavity between, or an area between the riprap and the bottom of the pond. And then what we're getting is erosion, and that's a problem. So moving forward with the construction of the inlet, we have to extend the fabric as well as the riprap all the way to the center of the pond. So that way we're not going to see that removal or the erosion of the dirt that goes into that. Next is the outlet itself. In the outlet, you have the outlet. It's just a large pipe, and then in front of that is a large wall. That wall is about 4 inches or so in width, and the height depends on the level that we want to have within the pond, which is fine. And then below that, there is about a 4 or 6 inch hole that allows water to continue to run out, and that's some type of it's a rate. It's a rate control device that in case of a large rain event, water continues to keep flowing through, even though it may spill over that spillway over top of the wall. The water still continues to flow out as the water rises. That's great. The design is great, but it's a problem, especially if we want to reuse the water. Because here's what happens. Now we're in a situation where we're pumping the water out, and as that pond starts to fill up again, we're trying to, as rain events happen, and they're not 100-year rain events, they're just smaller events. The water arises, and then the water starts running out of that hole. It is actually defeating the purpose because it never reaches to the level of the lake or the pond level that we're looking for. And what we're having, that was mentioned earlier, we have residents that have gone in and actually sandbagged that hole shut so they could have water in their pond to experience the nicety of having the view of the water from their homes, and which is a problem. And then just for experimental sake, we also on ourselves as a city just plugged one of the holes ourselves to see what would happen. And of course, the pond is filling back up. The issue that we're having with that is number one, the Weiss Creek Watershed District does not allow you to plug those holes, and the city of Hugo does not requires you not to plug them as well. And we're actually violating our own regulations. So we'll see what happens. But that is a problem, and we need to figure out a way, with the help of hopefully with the DNR and with the staff at Met Council, to figure out a way that we can, other than a high rain or a high rain event, try to maintain a level within those stormwater ponds that we can actually use it and manage it like we want to. That's a problem. Next is the pumping of the ponds. I know that some of the areas have large developments, and those require large, very expensive pumps to make those work. But we have smaller residential areas, developments that don't require such large pumps. So what we've done is we've taken a pump and we've put it on the end of a roller, rolled it into the middle of the lake, and we just use that. And it's been working out beautifully. And that helps us facilitate using groundwater to reuse on these lower developments that we have here in the city of Hugo. I'm just looking at my notes. Bear with me, please. The other thing too is when we do the intake or the intake for the pumps, one of the things that we found that when we had contractors put it in, some of these contractors just went put through the pipe into the pond, and they didn't go to the bottom or the deepest end of the pond, and they only went in like, let's say 15 feet or whatever. And what happened is we sucked the water all the way down to where that was exposed, and we can't pump the water anymore. So we ended up having to add extensions to the pipage in order to get the water, the remaining water, out of the stormwater pond. So that's another issue that we ran into that we've been trying to work with. One of the things that we are looking at wanting to do is moving forward is to put some type of permitting process in place so we can, when these stormwater ponds are being created and developed, that we can actually go in and look at them and approve them before the contractor moves on. We want to make certain that some of these issues are addressed, like for example, like I said, the ripraffing, making certain that the pipage for the inlet for the pump goes to the bottom of the pond, and things like that. So that's another issue that we have. One thing that we would like to have help with from the DNR or from the Met Council or both would be to have an intern or maybe an employee sit down and actually help us develop a manual that explains how to construct a pond, how to use a pond, how to use the pumps, how do you, like for example, if you have to an HOA, when to turn the pumps on, can we put zones within the HOA itself? Can we make that happen? How much water usage should we apply? You know, as far as inch a day, 2 inches, I mean, inch a week, 2 inches a week, whatever. What we've been finding is that when people, when we put these ponds in, folks wanted to have their individual sprinklers, which they set that up in their garages, that was fine, it worked. But they set it at the highest level. Some of these were just brand new sod, and they never changed them. And that's the problem. They sucked the water. They sucked the water all out. They sucked the water out of the ponds. There was nothing left, and we started getting complaints because there was no water left, and that's part of the problem. We were quote semi overusing our water, and so the HOAs would have better regulation or control over how much water to be able to draw out of that. So, and that's basically what I have so far. You know, our results have been positive for the most part. The acceptance here in our community has been outstanding, and we continue to keep working to develop more ponds and try to grab more water and reuse that as we move forward. So, thank you.
Thank you to all of our speakers. This is Lanya Ross. I'm stepping in for Emily. We are running a little behind, but I do want to make sure that we have time for some of the questions. We've had a really great range of experiences and perspectives shared, and if there's anything you'd like to learn a little bit more about, our speakers are available to try and answer those questions. I will be watching the chat, and I know Tessa will be looking for hands raised.
And Lanya, while we're waiting for questions, I realized that I forgot to have the approval of the minutes from the July 20th meeting. So if we could quick do that, if anybody would like to make a motion and a second to approve the minutes.
Phil Klein, motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Phil. Do we have a second?
Second.
I'll take Vanessa. I think she got through
Sure.
first for the second. Any changes, discussion of the minutes? Hearing none. Tessa, can you do the roll?
Certainly. May I hear from Council Member Jeff Berg,
Aye.
Council Member Sandy Berman?
Aye.
Thank you. Council Member Annika Bankston? Council Member Annika Bankston, are you still on the line? I will come back to Council Member Mike Wong.
Sorry, yep, I had to unmute two ways.
Thank
Yep,
you, Annika.
approved. Aye, yep.
Aye.
Was that you,
This is Mike.
Councilmember Mike Wong?
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Phil Klein,
Aye.
Councilmember Brad Larson. I did see you had joined. We'll come back to you. Councilmember Catherine Nuschler.
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Patrick Shea. Patrick Shea, are you in agreement with the minutes approval? I will come back to you. Councilmember Jamie Sherman.
Aye.
Thank you. And I would presume that you, Madam Chair, are in agreement.
Aye. And since we don't have any nay votes and it's not going to be close or anything, I don't think we need to go back to the other people who missed their opportunity to vote. So in the interest of time, we can move
Wonderful.
on. Did anybody have any questions for our people who presented information? Not seeing or hearing anybody. You can reach out to them by email afterwards if you have any other questions. And I would turn it back to Lanya for the group exercise.
All right. You have heard a lot of information, and now it is your opportunity to contribute. And we went through the roll call, so I know audio is working for most of you. I am going to invite you all to participate in a mural exercise. I know we're still doing these virtual meetings. It's not ideal. I prefer we were all in person, but I really appreciate that you've all leaned into this technology and have been willing to use it as the tool we have. I did attach to the MAWSAC meeting agenda a PowerPoint presentation that goes over the group exercise. For those of you who don't have access to Mural and who are following along, I would invite you to look at that PowerPoint presentation. It is the same information that we will be using in Mural. However, I am going to invite all of the MAWSAC members to go to the Mural board using the link that was sent to you by Tessa earlier today. And do let us know if you did not have that link. We will try to get that out to you. And again, if that is not working for you, we invite you to share your comments verbally as well. Just raise your hand and we will call on you. So I am going to share my screen, which will take just a moment. And this is not ideal, I know. Keep trying to make it better. Can I get a confirmation from Emily or maybe Tessa that my screen is being shared?
Yep.
And is it just the website or is it my whole screen?
It's the whole browser window. So I see the
Okay.
4 tabs.
Okay. I'm trying to share it as just one tab and I haven't been able to get it to work, but you can for those of you following along, you can see that several members have been able to join us here, although we're still waiting on a few more. And I would like to, you can see people kind of moving around here. I am going to, in the interest of not having everybody show up, hide some of those cursors. But to navigate this mural board, if you go over to the gray bar on the left, there are some different ways, little icons. You can add shapes and connectors, you can add text or post-its. So that's one way that we're going to add content, and you can simply double click somewhere on the screen and a little sticky note should appear. Select it and make it go away. You can, let's see, click and drag to navigate around the space, or you can use the zoom arrows here in the lower right to do plus and minus to zoom in and out. And there's also an option, if you turn on a little bullet list on the top right part of your screen for outline, it will bring up an outline option, outline tab over on the right side of your window. So if you click on one of those elements, it will also move you to different content on the mural board. So that's what we're going to do. I cannot see very well if there are hands raised or comments in the chat, so I will rely on our chair or Tessa or Emily to stop me, all right?
Not seeing any.
Okay. Is anybody having trouble and would like us to resend the link to you? Mike Wang says he's having trouble. Tessa, is that something you'll be able to email Mike about?
As I am unable to see the chat in this particular format, could you read aloud his question and I can address it
I can
appropriately?
send it. I'll send it, Mike.
Perfect. Thank you, team. All right. Well, we're going to do this. It's going to be very similar to the exercises we've done at our past 2 meetings. So the first question that I ask the committee to consider is, as you read through the problem statement that has been drafted around the challenges of groundwater and surface water interaction, what's your level of support for that? Based on what you've heard today and your own experiences, have we captured a good description of this challenge, or are you feeling a little tension about it? I will give you about 30 seconds to read through the text under the heading Support for Problem Statement and Goal. This is also in that PowerPoint presentation. And then I am going to do a sticky dot exercise where I'll ask you to rank it on a scale of 1, you really like it, all the way down to 1, no. I'll be quiet for about 30 seconds.
I'll just note that Joe Richter is also having trouble accessing Mural. Said so in the chat.
Emily, if you can send him the link as well.
I will.
And if you still have trouble accessing it, I will have you open up the PowerPoint presentation linked to the agenda called Group Exercise. And what I am having people look at is the problem statement. Oh, somebody's got some actions going on here. So things moved around a little bit.
Lanya, this is Wendy. I just want to let you know I need to step away for a couple minutes and I will be right back.
Okay, thank you. So really quickly, as you think about the challenge of groundwater surface water interaction, I want you to think about how strongly you support how this has been described. So I'm going to start a voting exercise. When I say begin voting, you are each going to have a little tiny sticky dot. You place it on number 8 for you really like how it's written right now, all the way down to 1 you really don't like how it's written right now. And if you just click your mouse on those numbers, it should place your dot for you. All right? Begin voting. Queue of how many people have voted, because I can watch how many people are voting up near the top of the screen. So I see some people are still thinking about it. Again, for anybody who can't access Mural, can look at the problem statement in the group exercise PowerPoint presentation linked in the agenda. All right, I'm going to give you 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Done. What we are seeing is some votes for 7, so fairly high support, maybe some minor revisions. A vote for agreeing, but having some reservations. And some lower support, some 3s, and kind of in the 3 and 4 stand aside. Don't like it, but won't hold up the group. So at this point, I would like to ask whoever is having some concerns about this, if they would be willing to share verbally what kind of makes that sort of feeling of not my favorite.
This is Jamie Sherban.
Jamie.
Some of my reservations aren't necessarily content, they're more tone or grammar. I'm thinking about the audience that will read this and needing to be brief, concise, and plain language. I think some of the statements are really long sentences and they try to combine lots of ideas, and they might be better articulated in shorter sentences or shorter overall.
Fair point. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add?
This is Wendy. I'm back. I didn't get in time to vote, but I agree with Jamie. It's especially that last paragraph, the TAC, MAWSAC, Met Council.
Yep.
we really don't need that. But yeah, it just seems a little longer than it needs to be.
Fair enough. Well, with that in mind, and please, if you have additional to share, oops. Somebody moved things. Pardon me, I don't mean to make you car sick. I apologize, everybody. Lock some stuff down. What I'm going to ask you now to do a little bit of brainstorming about what would make your support stronger. We're hearing plain language, more clarity. But I'm going to give you a minute or so to work in this portion of the mural board where you can share your suggestions for what would strengthen the problem statement for you to help you move your support up. Maybe you want to describe the challenge a little differently. Maybe we missed something. Think about maybe what happens or what opportunities happen if we just keep doing things the same way and we don't change. Whatever ideas. And you can edit one of the existing sticky notes. I'm going to add in the plain language. So I'll give it about a minute for you to share your ideas. Just to keep myself accountable. And if anybody would like to share verbally, I would welcome comments as well, and I can capture them. Emily, something's moving around. I'm going to have you, if you have a chance, go pull that support content back over and lock it down. See, people are still typing. I'm seeing start with the problem is, or something more direct. Bullet point list of goals. More clarity in definition and applicability of the goal to groundwater versus surface water aquifers. Thank you. And as we continue to have this conversation, and as you have ideas that could make our problem statement and our goal more clear, please feel free to continue adding content there. More brief, concise. I strongly support plain language, so I appreciate these comments. But this is where I think we might want to spend the most of our time. There have been a number of suggestions thrown out in past conversations, interviews with committee members, at the TAC meeting, conversations with staff. And so what we're seeing here in the section of the Mural board called Prioritizing Solutions is a list of those actions, and we have color-coded them. So actions or activities in purple are more financial. Those in orange are outreach and engagement related. The light blue is research related action recommendations. Green is more regulatory. Dark bluish green is regional policy. And the gray are additions that TAC shared at their last meeting. So what I would ask is for you to look these over. And these are also short versions of the actions that are in the memo of recommendations that was attached to the meeting agenda. So all of this information is in that recommendations memo that you can look at for those of you who don't have the Mural board. And my question for you is, as you look these over, is there anything you would like to add? Or is there anything you would like to change? And we did ask TAC to roughly sort these actions based on if they thought that they were a smaller or more short-term impact on the goal. That's on the left side of this square, or if they were a bigger or more long-term impact. And that's on the right. And then if they were going to be easy to implement, those are up at the top, or hard to implement. So this was just their sort of first stab at what these actions might entail. So feel free to move these around as well. And for those of you who, again, are not in Mural, I would encourage you to look at the memo document that's attached to the agenda and think about, for you, when it comes to the challenge of managing groundwater and surface water in a more integrated way, or the ramifications of groundwater and surface water interaction, what would be really critical for you? What do you think is the most important thing to focus on? You could share that verbally. I will add your comments to this Mural board. zoom in a little bit. I apologize. I don't mean to make you car sick. See, engaging watersheds in policy creation. Ensure all water policies are aligned. It's getting moved around. I did, Phil, you had mentioned in your discussion wanting to have maybe an intern or other resources to help develop guidance for stormwater practice and the design so that we make sure they are functioning in wet and dry conditions was sort of my interpretation, but feel free to change that. Seeing some research and policy statements on aquifer storage and recovery being added. I appreciate with regulatory agencies being more open to allowing new ideas to take place. There's some good thinking going on here. Does anybody see anything on here that they sort of want to put a caution by or a question mark by? Or in the recommendation memo?
This is Vanessa. I am having a hard time reading all these. Is there any mention of water quality concerns?
Great question. We haven't, in this shorter abbreviated version, we don't call it out specifically in a lot of places, but we do have an item here for research on how contamination is moving between and impacts groundwater and surface water resources.
Okay, yeah,
Is
the
that
Department, yep, and then the Department of Health has been looking at pathogens, so that might be something to be concerned about.
So consider, this is really rough, so be more specific.
Yeah,
I'm adding,
nope,
consider
that
pathogens
works.
moving between.
Yeah, I mean, mainly it's from surface water to groundwater would probably be the direction it would most likely go.
Thank you for that addition. And is it, we need to know more about it, or we need to?
I think we need to know more about it.
Okay. Great. Does anybody else have something they'd like to check on? I appreciate that addition. I'm seeing increased state funding for collaboration between community water systems being added. More education to local residents on the interactions of surface water, groundwater. That was something I noticed in our speakers. The Emily, John, Phil, Tiffany, Leslie, I think all of you at some point talked about public perceptions. I thought that was an interesting theme. So I know I was going to make this mural board exercise a little shorter, but there's some really great information being added here. So I don't want to cut anybody off. And I'm gonna throw this back to our speakers. If there was something, sort of an action that you think would be very valuable, what do you want to make sure that the committee considers? I recall, Tiffany, your point about understanding climate change, supporting collaborations, partnerships, and more information. I think we have that in here. Should I give it one more minute?
I would say we're good since we're running behind anyway, and people can email you if they have any other suggestions.
Fantastic. All right. So then the only last little bit that I wanted to make sure I asked was, is there, if committee members are thinking about this, if there is something that you think could really get us started now to tackle, to make some difference about how we're handling some of these groundwater surface water interaction challenges. If you have an example of an existing effort that could be used as a model or expanded on, or where we could start some work, I would invite you to throw some ideas out there. Hugo's stormwater reuse. That was our minute. Yeah, I think that was some great, that there's these local pilot projects, these programs that that are being done intentionally. People working on them are paying attention to the different phases and learning lessons and sharing some of those lessons learned. And as we continue to explore this groundwater surface water topic, I also want to know, who do you see as really important leaders? Who should we make sure that we're engaging with, either to lead projects or who are some critical partners? I just wanted to, you all have a lot of relationships and know who is going to be influential in your organization and your community. So if there's leaders and partners who you'd like to see, this is a great spot for that. PCA, some projects. Carrie Jennings, the University Freshwater Society, I think they are a great resource. And I appreciate the member who has jumped in. What expectations do you have for these efforts or these leaders? It's not just, we think you're great, it's, this is how you specifically can add to this effort. So. I appreciate that, the city administrators and water system operators being crucial partners. I also heard in some of the discussion earlier, watershed districts. I know one of the interesting political tensions I've heard, and this came up at TAC, was that water supply is the responsibility, it's managed at that municipal level for the most part, and that authority stops at the municipal boundaries, but that surface water is managed at that watershed level, which is a different scale. And so when we think about applying different management goals, there's some tension there. I appreciated the comment that scale brings together city electeds and watershed people and county officials. There's some, thank you for the examples that already exist that we can leverage. SGS, DNR. that County Geologic Atlas. I have appreciated, and if there's any suggestions to continue promoting that, this building the foundational data that allows us to understand these connections. The Geologic Atlas having more of a surface water component, for example, just one. I'm going to leave this mural board. This is live. You still have the link to it. We will be taking a screenshot and we will be pulling all of the comments that we have from this mural board into the minutes. So for those of you who couldn't get into the board itself, that information will be available to you after this meeting. And also, if you have additional input, feel free to share with us and follow up with our speakers. Is there any aha or takeaway that anybody would like to share before we wrap this discussion up? Concerns, questions, excitement? We're a quiet group today. Someday we're all going to be in a room again together. And yeah, I expect a much noisier experience. I will enjoy it. But this is great. Thank you again for being willing to use this in lieu of an in-person meeting. I am going to stop sharing, and I think this brings us back to being roughly on time. That was a little accelerated. Thanks all for doing that. So that moves us into sort of group work presentation for the drafting the MAWSAC report. Greg, I should have a presentation for that. This is us, like next steps. We've been having these meetings and you've been sharing all of these ideas and kind of helping us sort through the different actions that we might want to take or different recommendations we could promote. And the next step is to put that into a report and then share that with the council, with the legislature, with other stakeholders. So I wanted to give you an update on that process. Next slide. So again, we keep talking about this 2022 MAWSAC report, stressing that the audience, the primary audience is the Met Council and the Minnesota legislature, but I do think a secondary audience it's important to keep in mind are the variety of policymakers. That might be internal council staff who are working on drafting policy, or even people in your organizations and in your communities who are thinking about different policy implications. So, but it's a fairly high level audience. And again, we're providing a set of recommendations, supporting information around what in your experience and in our organization's experience is our high priority water supply topic. And the goal is that our policymakers and influencers will be better informed as we develop and implement policies, because we want to achieve some multiple benefits. We also want to reduce unintended impacts to water supplies by some of the other things that we're doing. So that's kind of the high level goal. And this is a report that is required by Minnesota statute. So it's important to do this, and doing it now is important because it can inform some of the regional policy updates, but it is also part of that statutory charge to the council and to MAWSAC. Next slide. So this is going to be its own separate piece, but I do want to acknowledge that it can build on the 2017 MAWSAC report, which was a high-level report to the legislature setting some direction for water supply work in the region. So this is a resource that we have built from. Next slide. And the process for this 2022 report is grounded in those committee member interviews and also staff interviews that we used to draft the original problem statements, but it has, I'm going to include information from the TAC meetings as they review and revise problem statements and recommended actions. These meetings, MAWSAC committee review and revision of content, but right now it's time to start actually drafting it. So we're in this phase of staff beginning to create that document and looking for some committee volunteers to help us craft that content. It would then be reviewed by MAWSAC and TAC, their member agencies, and some key water supply stakeholders before MAWSAC approves it and then shares with the council and the legislature. So that's our high-level process. Next slide. Our goal is to submit this to the council and to the legislature in February of 2022. That gets us at the beginning of that legislative session. So I think that's the goal we're shooting for. So it's going to be a busy fall, but we've done a lot of work. Next slide. What we've heard so far, and Emily and I have been listening to the TAC and MAWSAC conversations and working with our internal communications staff. And based on what we've heard so far, we have a proposed outline for you about what this report could include. And I wanted to just take a moment to have you look at this and see if this is the kind of information that you're comfortable with, if we're missing anything, and also if there's anything in particular you think we really need to highlight and elevate, because we'll really do some more different design work, graphic design work, or whatever we need to do for content that we want to really pop. We've heard that it's important to provide some background information. Who's MAWSAC, for those who don't know, why the report was created, and how these recommendations were developed. Why should anybody reading this, be confident that this is coming from is grounded in our stakeholder needs and process is credible. Clearly, wanting to share information with the goals and recommendations, an explanation of some of the regional challenges that are driving the focus on these particular recommendations, reiterating some principles, because it's not just what we do, but how we do it. We want to do our work in a collaborative way. We want to leverage partnerships is something that we've heard again and again. We've heard calls to prioritize certain funding, collaboration, technical assistance, and research. We've talked about the 4 areas of water quality, land use and water supply, groundwater, surface water interaction. We'll be talking about infrastructure at our next meeting. Having value and sharing some local stories and examples, and then providing more supporting information for those who want to know what's the data that supports this. So maybe some appendices of some key information is what we've heard so far. I would welcome any reactions to this or questions. We start to draft this kind of information. Does that set us on the right path?
This is Wendy. It looks like this report is going to be considerably longer than the one from 2017. Is that correct?
I think it will, because I think there's an appetite for including a little bit more specificity. And so, yes, I'm very passionate about plain language, and one of my favorite sort of metaphors for that is the bite, snack, meal approach to communicating. So I think, and we've talked to our internal communications staff about this, there may be some value in having a word report, a document, but also having a higher level, more graphic companion piece, a more summary piece. And so we have been requesting communication support to tackle it that way.
Sounds good.
Okay, good. Well, are there other suggestions for how we can make this as impactful as possible to your policymakers? This is a general question to all the committee. Is there something that is particularly effective in getting through to some of your leaders?
This is Jamie. The question I hear most from our local leaders and legislators is often just, what do you want me to do? And if we can be as clear with the recommendations part as possible, it's sort of third on this list behind background and goals. And I think if you guys are really good at using graphics and formatting to accentuate those things, and that's something I'd love to see again.
All right. You make a good point. What should I do? Front and center. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Phil, Phil Klein. I agree with Jamie. I think we need to keep this as simple as possible and to the point. They're busy as well, and I think I think they get more out of it if we just give them the information that they're looking for. That'd be very helpful.
Okay. Short and sweet.
That
That's the
also
goal.
can go from like an executive summary standpoint and then details if people want to dig into them.
Good executive summary. All right, we will add
Okay.
that to our request with communications.
Do we have people who wanted to volunteer to help write this?
Yeah, next slide, please, Greg.
Sorry, I had one other thought. I just was there. It seems like it's kind of missing like a next steps kind of slide. Or recommendations, right? I mean, because we prioritize, but but we say goals and recommendations, but we don't really say, recommended direction, kind of next steps direction, actions to take.
So can I ask a clarifying question? When you say next steps for, we have made these recommendations, council, you should take this next action on these recommendations. Okay.
Yeah, it's sort of, it's the pretense like we're doing this for a purpose, and to get to that purpose, what else needs to happen beyond this?
I missed that. Thank you so much. This absolutely does need that. Will do. I'm going to move to the next slide, but please feel free to continue. So I just asked you that point blank and asked you to give me a whole bunch of detailed information kind of on the fly. But what would be really helpful to the staff who are working on this would be if we could get 3 MAWSAC committee or MAWSAC members as volunteers. And we're also going to be asking for volunteers from TAC to help us draft some content. We've got really rich information to draw from, and staff are have some suggestions and have started to draft some proposals. But I'm roughly estimating about 12 hours of time from September through December, and that would include a couple of meetings, 2 to 4. It would depend on what would work for the volunteers, and maybe some independent review time, and we could be very flexible about that. And the task specifically would be to provide some early input on the report messaging, format, and content, kind of a deeper conversation like we just had. Providing more specific input on water supply recommendations. If you have an area that you're particularly interested in seeing some certain recommendations developed, that would be fantastic. Providing some advice and assisting council staff to connect with groups or individuals who could help us develop some content. So there may be that you have some relationships that we could leverage to get some input. And then finally, just reviewing and providing comments on drafts before we take it to all of MAWSAC members. And we would be very supportive council staff. So scheduling meetings, providing drafts, follow-up would be our role to support you. Anybody who is interested in either helping us draft all the content, or if there's a particular topic that you would really be interested in contributing to, we would welcome your volunteer time. We will follow up with emails repeating this request so you can have some time to think about it. But your contribution would be incredibly valuable, and I think that this report does have the potential to be very influential and supportive of advancing some water supply priorities in the region. I think the next slide is my closing slide. Great, yes. So feel free to, Emily and I will be reaching out, but feel free to contact us. Also, Ali Elhassan, our manager, for questions, you need any clarification or have any suggestions. Thank you.
So next up on the agenda would be the Minnesota Drought Task Force update. Ali, are you with us? Yes.
Yes, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to go quickly about the State Drought Task Force. First, I will talk about the roles and purpose. The purpose of this task force, which is formed and maintained and managed by the Department of Natural Resources, is to share information, coordination, and planning for drought. The roles are very clear that Minnesota Department of Natural Resources is the state agency that determines the state drought phases and responses based on climate and water data that they collect. And then they are the ones who are responsible for convening the task force. The task force members, their role is to share organization, drought-related responses and challenges, as well as coordinating drought responses with other task force members. So we have a variety of members in that task force. I sit for the Metropolitan Council, but we have the Department of Natural Resources, the state climatologist, the Barary Island Indian Community, Lower Sioux Community, Eden-Barary, City of Eden-Barary, American Water Works Association, United States Geological Survey, United States Department of Agriculture, United States Army Corps of Engineers, National Weather Service, and then University of Minnesota, Met Council, PCA, Department of Transportation, and other state departments and other community representation. The numbers of members is about 25 members. And as I mentioned, the main purpose of this task force is sharing information and coordination and planning. The task force is reactive. Actually, the task force was not convened until we reach a certain level of, the state reached a certain level of drought that the DNR convened the task force. Mostly it's damage mitigation and not resiliency or adaptation. The discussion, most of the discussion is about what we are doing right now to mitigate the impact of drought in the state. There was no discussion for long planning for what will happen, how we can respond to other issues that we see coming our way. And as you can hear today in some of the presentations, that this fluctuation, 7 years of wet years, and then you have 1 year that's drought, and communities need to change quickly. Couple of the discussions and things that discussed during that time, there was a big issue about prescribed burning for some of the agencies who are responsible for doing prescribed burnings. They have to stop that because of the drought. They also, some of the agencies needed to ramp their preparation for wildfire. And as you have here, there's a couple of wildfire up north that they have to deal with it. Department of Natural Resources mentioned that there was an increased well interference complaints, that the number of well interference complaints that the department received over the last 2 or 3 months have been increasing significantly. Department of Agriculture was mainly working in providing farmers relief. Some of the water quality monitoring has been suspended because of the low flows in the rivers and lakes. And there was an issue with power generation on the Mississippi River that some of the power generation have been seized because of the low flow also. The communities have been facing water use challenge. Some of them have been going into water restrictions. One example is city of Woodbury have been reducing their irrigation. The outdoor irrigation is allowed only on 2 days instead of 3 days. Your trash day, and then one of the weekends days, either Saturday or Sunday. But other than that, you are not allowed to irrigate outdoor your lawn irrigation. And there is some other examples that restrictions have been implemented in other cities. There was a skyrocket demand on well drilling. If you try to drill a well right now, you have to wait until 2022. You have to be in line until 2022. So it's a very good business for well drilling. If you are in the business of well drilling, this is really prime time for well drillers at this point. One of the things for us in the Met Council, we have been monitoring the river. Our monitoring activities have been increased because based on the flow in the river and the dissolved oxygen levels, that will determine whether we need aeration for the effluent from our wastewater or not. And we have seen increased aeration that we have been implementing over the last 3 months. We also have seen in the water supply side an increased water conservation demands for education activities. As I mentioned before, or as you might know, we have developed with the help of the University of Minnesota an educational trailer about outdoor irrigation that has been going around for visits with communities in their summer activities and community activities. And that has been on demand for every weekend during this summer. This is the first year we have developed that, and it came actually on the year of the drought, and so many people are requesting it. One of the things that I just wanted to share that since we have rains early in September, the drought task force has not been meeting. So this is actually, I'm just reporting for you from what has happened until the middle of August, where we had our last meeting. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I can stand for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Not seeing or hearing any, we will move on. At the end of the meeting, we usually go around and give everybody a chance to say something that might be on their mind. If you have any other thoughts about the mural activity or other general priorities, key concerns, or anything else that the group should be aware of. So I will go down the list. Annika, you have anything? And you can say pass if you have nothing.
I do not. Thank you for this opportunity to participate.
Yes. Catherine.
Sorry, was that me that you called on? I particularly appreciated Emily's presentation, and I'm looking forward to connecting a team here at PCA that's thinking about surface water, groundwater interaction for water quality standards with the work that my council is doing to see how we can coordinate. And she's not on anymore, but I don't think, but I appreciated Tiffany's presentation about Lake Nokomis. I used to play softball there and frequently would end up with ducks in the outfield next to me. So that helped tell me a little bit about why that happened.
Thank you. John Clark.
No comments. Thanks.
Okay. Jamie Sherman.
I'll pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Berg.
Nothing for me, thank you.
Joe Richter.
I'm just going to express that I'm concerned about the drought, and let's hope that we have rain soon.
We've had a ton of rain in my neighborhood. Mike Wong,
Just thank you to all the presenters, and that's all I got. Thank you.
thank you. Patrick Shea,
Hi, good afternoon. Great presentation. Nothing else to add. Thank you.
thank you. Phil, and thank you for your presentation, Phil.
Yeah, I just say, thanks for allowing me to do it. And also, if you have any questions on the ponds, please, by all means, give us a call because we've had a lot of experience with it and be more than happy to share it with any of you.
Thank you. Sandeep Berman.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. Lots of good information. The one concept that I wanted to throw in there that Lanya is well aware of is MDH. When we look at wellhead protection, increasingly we do pay attention to what we call conjunctive delineations, where you do look at the even the groundwater-based systems that have a surface water contribution to them. So I think that's another way of both qualitatively and quantitatively addressing the surface water, groundwater interconnections when you're doing drinking water wellhead protection. So I'm sure that that will get factored in as the discussion moves along. But I just wanted to express another way of perhaps taking this into consideration. But thank you, great discussion, great meeting, appreciate it.
Thank you. Vanessa DeMuth.
Yes, I'm sitting in for my supervisor, Valerie Grover. I'm with Dakota County, and I appreciate everything I heard today. Ali made me think of something. I'm wondering if this group has talked about, or maybe could talk about in the future, about splash pads that usually cities operate for the kids to, splash around in the water. The systems I'm aware of are just pump and dump, and the city of Rosemont uses waste up to 11 million gallons of water a year. And is that something this group has talked about or is aware of?
I have not been the chair that long. I'd have to let somebody from staff who's been around longer than me address that. I know they had to close down the one in the zoo because kids were getting sick from the recirculated water because there was E. coli in it. Any staff?
Right. And so that's often why these are designed to what I call pump and dump and not recycle. Like the city of Rosemont didn't want to pay for someone to come out on the weekend and test the water for its chlorine content.
That's their reason for doing pump and dump, really?
One of a couple, yeah. Well, it was more expensive to recirculate as well.
Well, yeah. Okay. Any staff have a comment on that or thoughts?
This is Lanya. We have not done anything really focused on that, but it's certainly a topic that has come up from time to time. I've had some really fascinating conversations with my coworkers. Many of you know Brian Davis, for example, and his passion for water efficiency. So yeah, let's put a pin in that and keep that as a topic of interest.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. We've gone all the way through the list of people. Did I miss anybody? I think we got them all. So next steps, staff is going to begin drafting the MAWSAC report, and they will be coming back to you and asking you to volunteer until 3 people step up. So think about if you can do that. I don't know if you guys want the chair as one of those 3 people or not, but and then let's see, next meeting will be November 16th, and the meeting topic will be infrastructure. Lanya, did you have anything else to add?
Maybe just that at that meeting, we will have had some conversations about this draft report. So that'll be a component of that meeting as well. And we have been talking about perhaps scheduling a virtual meeting of the sub-regional water supply work groups and TAC and MAWSAC. Many of you might remember an in-person meeting we had a couple of years ago, and everybody braved a blizzard to come together. So that is something that we might be looking to put together for December. So more information to follow.
Hey, great. And we are right at 3 o'clock. So being respectful of your time, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your participation.
Thanks, everyone.